All right, welcome everyone to Canada's Food and Everything Else Safety Podcast. You know what? We dive into the world of food safety and beyond. Today we have a really amazing special guest lined up. I'm blown away. I'm already geeking out a little bit, but we're going to come back after this, and then Dominic's going to introduce you to this incredible guest we have on. Here we go.
Welcome, Bill Marler. Jay, we're happy to have Bill Marler from Marler Clark in Seattle, I think, right, Bill?
Well, today I'm in London.
Oh, you're in London, yeah. So we're extra lucky.
Yeah. So, I mean, and they don't have central AC here, so it's a little.
Stuffy, but I heard it's hot there too. I heard it's hot.
It's warm. It's warm. I want to come back to the Pacific Northwest. So.
Well, thanks for joining us, Bill. Bill, as many people may know, the people that will listen to this podcast anyway, has been in the, I don't know how long you've been a lawyer, probably close to 30 years, I would imagine, 25 years?
No, I've been a lawyer since 1987. So
wow.
It's been a few years. So, but I started in food safety in 1993, so just 30 years ago in the Jack in the Box case. So,
yeah, and that's how I came to know you. I read a lot about that case, and I read a lot about, the ins and outs of what happened in that case. And we taught for a long time that's kind of when people started paying serious attention to food safety.
I would agree.
The kids died. I think 4 children died.
Mm-hmm.
And Jay, as we have spoken in the past, unfortunately, it takes tragic events like that to change things, and that's the crappy part about most things in the safety world is some tragedy has to happen before a change happens. Bill, tell us a little bit about the movie. We've talked about it already. We spent an hour talking about it. But there's a movie highlighting some of the things that have happened that's kind of started the change. But this many years later in the U.S. and I would say by extension in Canada, we haven't seen a lot of change. Tell us a little bit about kind of your thoughts on the whole evolution of where we are.
That's a good but very broad question.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, the documentary was like almost 2.5, almost 3 years in the making. It started before the pandemic and sort of wrapped up about 6 or 7 months ago before it aired. It's it's people are at least in the food safety space are talking about it, and I'm hearing from people from all over the world. And so, I'm kind of glad that some of it's out there. And as I say in the movie, I kind of didn't think that I would still be doing this kind of work or that we would have like a tragedy, like what's happening essentially in real time in Calgary with over 190 kids sick and, 20 on acute kidney failure. I thought we would be long past that. So there's part of me is really proud of the work I've done over the last 30 years, but there's a big chunk of me that's just frustrated that we have, children on dialysis from eating food. It's, it's really a sad situation.
We're an education company. We do independent audits as well, but we do food safety training and certification. Mm-hmm. What needs to happen to change the attitude and change, I don't always think it's regulation. I think that operators need to take this on board and say, we're going to do the right thing and we're going to make sure it's safe, because we know, that regulations are always minimum regulations.
Right.
And you can't regulate some of this stuff
I think that's the frustration I've had a lot. I do a lot of obviously do a lot of litigation. I've sued every major food company you can imagine in the U.S. and around the world. But I spend a bunch of my time out speaking to companies and regulators about food safety. As I say, teaching companies why it's a bad idea to poison people. And I always tell them that, there's a moral reason not to do it. And then there's the business reason not to do it. And, I think the frustrating thing for me is, in every foodborne illness outbreak I've been involved in, there always was a point in time before the outbreak that there were warning signs that, that weren't heeded. And I think that gets to the idea that you've probably heard people talk about it, having a food safety culture. It is more than just regulations. It's about, commitment. It's about training. I was reading an article this morning in the Tacoma, Washington News Tribune about a small but very tragic listeria outbreak that occurred linked to milkshake machines at a small kind of mom and pop chain. There's like 4 or 5 of them. And when the health department went in to inspect, when they finally figured out that there was an outbreak stemming from this restaurant, they learned that the crew that was supposed to be cleaning the equipment weren't using a brush that was specifically designed to clean the tubes where the product, was went through. And, that's most likely where the listeria propagated and created a biofilm and then sloughed off into the shakes at regular intervals and left 3 people dead and, 3 people quite ill with, obviously listeria complications. So, there you go, who is paying attention about what needed to be done. And it's just a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the restaurant chain. They may well go out of business, and the employees, and, it's been a company that's been in operation for 30 plus years. And then obviously the tragedy to the families and the victims. So, I wish there was a great answer, because you and I wouldn't have jobs, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I think
it's not the job we want to have, right? I know it's about more in your case than ours.
Yeah, absolutely. No. I mean, but one of the things you said earlier, you're absolutely right. When I first started doing this in Jack in the Box days, E. coli 0157 HUS, it was called the hamburger disease. But with the tragedy of Jack in the Box, with legislation that I helped push, the industry, and I don't hardly ever have a E. coli case linked to hamburger anymore. And so they essentially put me out of the beef business. And I've been hoping that they do the same thing with leafy greens, and who knows what this Calgary case, what the ultimate cause is going to be, what food item it is. But, I guess one of the things that I always, encourage people to do is, sort of pay attention to warning signs. I always tell the story about the Odwalla E. coli outbreak that occurred in '96. And it was an E. coli outbreak, mostly in the Western United States. But 80 people sick, 1 child died, a dozen kids with kidney failure. Odwalla, 6 months before the outbreak, had tried to sell their juice to the U.S. Army. Our U.S. Army came in and did an inspection of the facility and said your juice was not fit for human consumption.
Wow.
But they kept selling it anyway.
That was the unpasteurized juice, correct?
Exactly.
That was their claim to fame, was
unpasteurized juice, expensive unpasteurized juice. And I mean, so you think about it that way. It's like, Jack in the Box, they knew about the cooking regulations, but ignored it. Odwalla knew that their juice was not fit for human consumption and kept selling it to pregnant women and little kids.
Peanut Corp was the same thing,
Peanut
right?
Corporation of America. But, even most foodborne illness outbreaks are completely preventable but it's really a
Agreed.
matter of, in my view, having like the entire, from the management down and back up again, being committed to, not only profitability, but food safety, and to take it seriously. And unfortunately, we sometimes keep seeing the same mistakes happen again and again and again. And, I keep wanting to retire, but they keep pulling me back. So,
Yeah. Would you say Chipotle kind of was the same thing? What they had, procedures in
yeah,
place, and they were kind of. I teach that they were cowboys about it, right? They were.
Yeah, no, I think
They
that's
had a
actually,
cavalier attitude to it.
yeah, I think you're spot on. And they were focused on the wrong things. They were focused on, antibiotic free, and that they liked local farmers, and they were free range chickens. They were focused on things that are not, may well have some benefit to society, but they were focused on the things that weren't straight up, food safety, and that's why they weren't paying attention to their suppliers. They had salmonella outbreak linked to tomatoes, and then they had, they weren't focused on making sure their employees had stay-at-home policies. So they had 2 fairly significant norovirus cases, and then they had the E. coli case, and multiple E. coli cases. And this was all in 2005. It all happened, or excuse me, 2015. It all happened exactly the same time. And, that's why the federal government came in and charged them with misdemeanor crimes. And I think they paid, I think it was $20 to $25 million fine, one of the largest fines ever levied against a company in the U.S.
And how much we used to teach and talk about this then when it was happening. Billions in market value. They lost
billions in market
billions,
value.
right?
And frankly, millions and millions of dollars they paid my clients.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean,
but the millions they don't seem to be enough. That's the part that just boggles my mind. Is almost that that companies build this risk in,
like,
and they should. If like I always thought, hey, if you put 1/10 of, and I'm kind of the same way in COVID. If we put 1/10 or even 1/100th of the money that they lost in market value to training and staff retention, what would happen to their safety program?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's. I remember. I think it was about time that Jack in the Box was winding down and Odwalla popped up, that I started thinking to myself, it's like, over the course of the last few years, we took $110 million from Jack in the Box, 20 some odd million from Odwalla, but it doesn't seem to be changing everybody's behavior. And we think it should. And that's when I started inviting myself to food safety conferences to try to explain to them, what happens to some of these victims, that, it's not just a tummy, it's, an E. coli infection that, child suffers a stroke. I represented a Canadian kid who got E. coli 0157 in 2019, suffered a stroke, and he cannot walk, cannot talk, and can't feed himself. And now he's what, 5 years old, and he probably has a life expectancy of 25 to 30 years old, and it's just a tragedy. So, yeah, I mean, we just have a lot of work to do to try to convince companies to pay attention to details before the bus they're on careens off a cliff and, they wind up at the bottom of a ravine.
Yeah, our part was, lowering, as when we got in, our part of this was to lower the cost of training and finding better ways of doing it and better ways of delivering it so that more people could be trained, because that, the cost used to be a barrier. Right. And now I think what's happening in the restaurant industry, they got cost pressures more than ever. They got rising food costs, they got rising operating costs, rising utilities, all those things. And unfortunately, what we've seen happen in the industry, and I think it's probably been forever, but certainly in my lifetime, is when all those pressures happen, then corners start to get cut. They start cutting corners and start taking shortcuts on.
Yeah. But but even restaurants don't avail themselves to, the opportunities for free things. I'll give you an example. Most public health departments in the U.S. and probably in Canada as well will give out free hepatitis A vaccines. I just finished up a hepatitis A outbreak in Virginia. Happened at a family-owned chain restaurant, 5 or 6 restaurants, been around for 60, 70 years. They had one employee who tested positive for Hep A, spread it to 45 customers. 4 of them died and 2 of them had liver transplants. So, I say this not with any glee, but I bankrupted the entire family company and took all their insurance money to compensate these victims. Think about it from a point of view of not even mandating, a vaccine, but to encourage your employees to get free vaccines at your local health department. This whole tragedy would never have happened. But yet, restaurants have thought that was like the dumbest idea. The Restaurant Association in America has, fought that, has fought, having the CDC even recommending food service workers be vaccinated. And so,
is there any jurisdiction in the world that requires?
Yeah, there have been. Yeah, Clark County, Nevada, which is Las Vegas is. St. Louis County, Missouri, has mandated vaccines in both places. And certainly after an outbreak happens, well, a lot of times
they'll encourage,
line up and go, oh, I better do it. But hepatitis A is now part of at least in the U.S., is part of the childhood vaccine program. And so, but it's still, there are people who are 30 and over. There's a lot of people who've never been vaccinated. So they're both at risk for becoming infected and at risk from, becoming sick and dying or having a liver transplant. So
I guess on that note, I'm not sure what it's
on
like.
On that happy note.
Yeah.
So,
in the, I don't know what it's like in the UK. I believe in Italy, I have relatives to work in a food service establishment, you have to have a health card. You have to have a clean bill of health for that job. Do you think that? Is there value to that? Do you think that'll ever happen here? Well, not everybody needs training in Canada. Yeah. Like in Alberta, if you have less than 5 employees, nobody has to have training. Now it's nobody has to even be on site.
Yeah, this is one of those sort of things where I think you have to recognize, and you said this earlier, that some of these restaurants, their margins are not so great that they can spend a lot of money. But this is like one of those kind of things where, having trained food service workers, having vaccinated food service workers, having a good sick leave policy, those are common goods that I would argue is something that the state, the government, should back, because it's good. It's good for your constituents. It's good for customers. It's good for the businesses. It's good to keep, companies, in business and productive. And I think it's one of those sort of things that it makes having the taxpayers foot the bill for that probably makes a lot of sense, because it's a common good. That probably shows my progressive liberal streak. So,
I think COVID gave us some of that. Like I know here in Alberta, I believe Ontario, I can't speak to the other provinces, but during COVID, there was the federal government kicked in money to the provinces to help them put in sick leave policy, right? Which we believe that always makes sense. But again, at the same time, we would teach and we would ask managers, if you don't have this policy and you're telling the people to stay home, which is the right thing to do, how are they going to pay their rent? How are they going to buy food for their kids? Right?
Yeah.
This is a legitimate concern. So people go to work, especially in food service. They're the lowest paid people in the workforce, right? In almost any workforce. So,
right.
What can we do to, can we would teach, can you assign them non-food handling jobs? Can they go clean the parking lot? Could they go pick up, garbage in the parking lot, so that they're not working directly with food, but they're still going to be able to earn their wage to pay for, to pay their rent.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just, I think that, again, it's one of those sort of, it's a public policy argument that, that, people, that people, I mean, I just think that it's something we all have to sort of be cognizant that we're in this together, that we're only as safe as that food handler is not sick while working.
Right.
And, but it does require reallocation of resources. It does have a recognition of a common good. And I sometimes think that, we at least here in the U.S., maybe Canada, you guys might be slightly different, but I have a tendency, most of us in the U.S. have a little bit more of a cowboy mentality that, it's like, if it's not directly happening to me, I'm not going to even think about it. But,
it's probably the same.
I was going to say, it sounds the same here.
One of the things that happens to me all of the time is, when one gets sick, and this doesn't happen all the time, but usually it's a conservative person, and they'll say, I hate lawyers, I don't like people who sue, but I got really, really sick, or my kids got really, really sick, and so I want you to really take it to them, but I think the problem with that, that's sort of that sort of focus is very personal, and I think people need to just broaden that a little bit and go, if we spend a little bit more money, if we get paid a little bit more money for our restaurant food, maybe they could pay a little bit more money for wages. Maybe they could have a sick leave policy. Those are the things that, we don't really understand sometimes, the hidden costs, or I got a degree in economics, what they call the externalities, where something happens and, you push the problem off to somebody else, like pollution. So, yeah.
Yeah, that it's funny you say that. Again, another company I consulted to, one of the things that was facing them in the mid 2000s, before there was a boom happening, and there was no workforce. And my recommendation was, let's get benefits, let's raise the wage, and let's do all these crazy things that restaurants were doing. And he was reluctant, but he did do it. And guess what? His turnover went down. He's got 15-year employees now. Not that they don't have their own problems, but that idea of, are we willing to pay more for food? I think most people are, if they knew. And I think the pandemic again taught some of that to some of us, that we really need to look at this industry differently than, some companies, their business model is to have that turnover, so they're never going above the minimum wage, which from the safety side, we think that's wrong.
Right.
Do you think, back to the what's happening here in Calgary, is a food safety plan or a HACCP plan, would that make a difference in a central kitchen? Like, where can you argue? You could probably argue it for any kind of operation, right?
Yeah, I mean, my view is, HACCP. I know HACCP is a plan, but to me, HACCP is more of an attitude. It's and I sort of have a HACCP plan for how I practice law. I think about all the things that I want to get done. I think about, all the pitfalls that could happen in a case. And then I figure out how to avoid the pitfalls and to move forward in the most positive way, and then adjust as it goes. Mm-hmm. And in some respects, that's, the Bill Marler HACCP plan for being a lawyer. And, but it's more of a mentality and not a handwritten thing. And I think sometimes people develop a HACCP plan and then it just sits on a shelf somewhere, and they don't do the things they need to do on a day-to-day basis to create that, food safety culture that, Doug Powell, good Canadian, talked about, Frank Yanis talks about, Griffin from Wales talk about. Those are the things where you have a culture of food safety. The HACCP plan is built into the sort of the bones of the organization.
Yeah. Our latest iteration of our training has a module on culture. Yep. I think the challenge in that is turnover.
Yep.
Right. So it's and again, what we would teach is that the manager, I think in Washington, you call them the person in charge, but basically we say assign a food safety manager, assign somebody that's going to take food safety on as their project, let's say. But if the manager, the owner, the supervisor ain't putting that out there to their staff, then it ain't going to happen.
Right.
And again, I guess the unfortunate part of everything that's happening now is the economics are taking over, and it might get worse before it gets better. Here's the strange thing. I'll share something with you. When COVID hit, I thought our business was done because no restaurants were going to be operating, or they were going to be operating at such small scale. Nobody was going to need training. And the opposite happened. We had more training. Mm-hmm. And I asked people that would call into the office, because there's only a few of us working, hey, why are you buying training, right? Because we'd have a manager on the phone, and we'd talk to them, and I had the chance to speak to quite a few people, and they said, we're training because we can't have another thing against us. So when public health comes in, we want to make sure we're in compliance. And I thought to myself, wow, this is really a shitty way to get people trained.
Right.
It's for benefit, but it's like, why does it take this to make you look at it this way? And it goes back to this whole, out of tragedy comes some sort of change. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see some sort of change. AHS might bring their food safety, serving safer food. They had started a pilot a few years ago on having a food safety plan for a central kitchen, right, or a central commissary, or a larger operation where you're doing a lot of meals. So,
right.
I hope we do see change. I hope that all the people that are affected come out of this safely and without long-term hurt. That's probably, that's I guess the time will tell that.
Right. No, and what's interesting too. You talk about it as a food safety is a public good. The fact that you guys have in Canada, you have national health coverage. The taxpayers of Canada are going to have to take care of these children with HUS for the rest of their lives. And you kind of ask yourself, maybe it would have been a little bit more cost effective to invest a little bit more in training up front to avoid this long-term cost to taxpayers. So, there is a benefit to training and paying attention and creating a culture that prevents these outbreaks as opposed to, lets them happen and then moves on.
Is the breakdown, in your opinion, always Because you've been involved in suing large chains that have, I'm sure, since Jack in the Box, even more spectacular programs. Is it the culture that usually that the breakdown is?
Yeah, I think it's always the culture. It's always, you know, I always assume for the sake of argument that we all believe in evolution. I always find it kind of fascinating how, humans as a species, at some point we got out of the trees, and we must have been pretty good at like looking around to make sure there wasn't a lion or a tiger or a bear to get us, and it seems like what we've lost in the modern world is the ability to, in organizations, to think ahead, to pay attention to warning signs. And to me, it's like that's where the culture is missing. It's like, not to use the Jack in the Box spotted wallet cases again, but that's emblematic of problems, or the PCA, they knowingly were shipping salmonella tainted peanut butter. Why didn't somebody go, wait a second.
Yeah.
That's not a very good idea.
Right? Yeah,
that's not a very good idea. Or, and so I'm not, we don't know exactly what happened in this tragic thing in Calgary, but it's going to be something that's going to probably be really obvious, and somebody like professional like you guys are going to look at this and go, oh yeah, that was what it was, and they should have been paying attention to it, but they didn't. So
yeah, and other things I think on, we hear it on the audit side. Hey, we passed the public health inspection. Why do I have 200 things that you've noted on my audit report? And it's like, well, we're here for longer. We're looking at more things,
right?
And we're not holding you to that minimum standard. We're holding you to a higher standard, right? Because we don't want this to happen. Right. But that's often. I just heard it on Friday from one of our auditors that called, and the operator was just really mad that they got this score on their report, and they were telling the auditor, hey, public health was just here, and I got it perfect. It's like, how can you have all this stuff?
Right.
It's like, well, because the company that we work for, your franchisor, with us has said, here's what our standard is, and it's not that minimum standard. So I don't know how to change that. We think it's in training, but we don't train enough. Not everybody has to have training. Public health doesn't give operators the food regulation. I asked this. I still boggles my mind. It's like, why wouldn't you give them a copy of the food regulation when they get their food handling permit to say, here's what we're going to hold you against? They said, well, they can go download it and they can do it. I says, who do you think? It's like, nobody's going to do that. No, like the large operators might, but they're going to have a program in place. But the independents and all the little guys, they're not going to do that.
Right.
And that might go just one step further to tell them. And I think it's all these things. Training's not enough. Culture is important. Good suppliers are important. Good facilities important. Like all these things. And the tragic part of all of it is when one of them breaks down, the other ones don't necessarily pick up and protect us.
Right.
So
yeah, and then if you look at here's look at one commodity, romaine lettuce. Romaine lettuce, repeated outbreaks. The Canadian government, banned the importation of California romaine lettuce as they test for it, and but I'm working on a case, an E. coli outbreak that occurred in the U.S., 109 people sick last summer. And, we've now pinpointed the growing fields where the lettuce was grown. And, lo and behold, there's a cattle feedlot operation within 100 yards of it. And you're like,
wow.
Really? Didn't you learn anything from the Yuma, Arizona outbreak in 2018? So, didn't you? Obviously, they didn't watch the documentary because it hadn't been out yet. But I mean, it's sort of like, why are we repeating ourselves?
That was Walkerton in essence, not in lettuce, but Walkerton was
Sure.
feedlot. I don't know if it was feedlot or pasture, but on the hill and down in the valley was the water wells.
Yeah.
And then somebody literally asleep at the wheel on the but I think there's been radishes and scallions out of Mexico, kind of the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah. It's this whole.
Well, we should try to end on a more positive note.
Yeah.
So I mean, what's your thought? Do you think that from a training perspective, do you think having requirements for more training from the government would educate people?
Yeah.
So that
we want to see
turnover, because I know the turnover thing, that means you just have to, train more people.
We want to see lower cost, shorter training more often.
Mm-hmm.
Not every 5 years, because most people forget everything within a week, maybe even within hours of when they left the online course or the classroom.
Right.
I'm an advocate of, again, not from the business perspective, because this is the wrong way, but for $5 or $10 training every year or 2 years. And anybody, some counties in California have something like that where everybody has to have it. The problem with kind of like ours is verified who takes it. They have to show their ID. And I don't know why people would want to cheat food safety, but they do. But I would want to see everybody have some sort of minimum training, and I would want to see it more often versus every 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think that would go a small step. Here in Canada, I think we have in BC, they have a requirement for a food safety plan before you open. Not necessarily a HACCP plan, but basically just what are the risks and how are we going to mitigate them or reduce them or eliminate them. So that makes the operator go through a little bit of a step of identifying at least what the hazards are and how they're handle them. And I'm for more restaurant closures. I'm for the battle, and that's hard because public health doesn't want to put anybody out of business, right? But they're protecting the public. So, and that's going to be hard. I think that's going to be hard because industry is going to push back, and even the politicians are going to push back a little bit because. So I think that's that's
I think those are great. And if I had to tell you what like my couple of things are, one is in the U.S. We need to rethink land use and where crops that are ready, since ready to eat without a kill step, are grown in relationship to animal production. We all know, that these old E. coli cases, there's always a cow somewhere in the background. We know that. And so the question is how do you reduce that risk and still you want to have healthful food for people? I think that's one. The other thing too is I've been working on that, and I've been working on dealing with salmonella in chicken. 60% of the salmonella cases that occur in the U.S. are 1.4 million a year. 60% of those are linked to chicken and poultry consumption. And, but yet we have absolutely no regulations in the hatcheries and in the where the animals are grown. The only regulation we have is in the slaughterhouses. But once the bird's already contaminated with salmonella and it hits the slaughterhouse, there's nothing you can do about it. And then we still allow for companies to knowingly sell salmonella-tainted chicken because they say, "Oh, the housewives will cook."
That was a shocker in your movie, by the way. I was just
it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. But that's the I mean, you guys get our chicken too. So,
and you get ours, I think, right, as well. I think that goes. Yeah, so, and that's the same with beef and pork, I think, as well.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that I think we can do better, and if you fix those two things, restaurants would have less risk there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think consumers, well, the good thing that may come out of all of this is people are going to be asking those questions. They're going to say, the scores on doors thing, we talked with Jim Chan about, we don't have that. But that wouldn't have helped in this case anyway. Like, there wouldn't have been a yellow card at the daycare. You would have had to go to the central kitchen to see their, if they had, the reports definitely say that they've had yellow or, non fully compliant
Right.
reports in the past. So I think what might come is that everywhere now at every daycare, hopefully, the parents are asking, where's the food coming from? Right. So our hope is that that these kids and the other people involved get well quickly. I don't know if that's possible. I do have one more question for you though, Bill, before I got to go back to the negative part of this. And you said, we have public health care in Canada. I haven't done a lot of reading on this, but I see the payouts in the US versus the payouts in Canada when something happens. Generally in Canada, they're a lot less. In the Maple Leaf case, I think Maple Leaf was $26 million, and that was 22 people died. I thought it was a tiny amount. Do you think the payouts are smaller because of our public health care?
Yes.
It is, eh? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, and although we spend, God knows how much, multiple times what other people pay for healthcare. We have, somewhere between 75 million Americans do not have health insurance.
Yeah.
And of course, most people show up at ERs, and that's why our insurance rates go up, or public subsidizes them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you pay it one way or the other. It's just that we don't just deal with it. But the whole tort system, the legal system, was designed around the fact that we don't really have health care as a right for people in the U.S. So when I bring a lawsuit, it obviously takes care of the fact that they may not have health insurance because there's other systems, like New Zealand, where I've spoken many times on food safety stuff. They have essentially a workers' comp type situation for ill people. If you get sick, you get poisoned, you get a certain amount of money. It may not be a lot, but you get a certain amount of guaranteed money, and you get your health coverage. So, is that a better situation than it is in the US, or is it just a different situation? They also have more fining of restaurants. I mean, I could design, a non-lawyer driven food safety system that would have people taken care of, and companies being held, civilly and criminally responsible for what they do. You could set a system up that was different. The one thing that civil litigation in the U.S., I think we do that no one else does in the world, is that we have the ability, to put big companies under oath, to subpoena documents, to find out why this outbreak happened. I mean, you think about it, I was able to uncover what happened in Jack in the Box and why. I was able to uncover what happened in Odwalla, and I've done that countless times over the last 30 years. And that's one of the things that I can do. I can put the CEO of Chipotle or Dole or Jack in the Box under oath and make them answer the questions that they need to answer. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, in some respects, a good way for companies to learn, a lot of companies to learn, that it's really a bad idea to poison their customers.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note, I hope we get to talk again, because I'd love to have you. When we disconnect here, I'll ask you a quick question. But
sure.
Jay, let's thank Bill. Can we say, hey, when something different happens in this Calgary case, are we able to chat again if you have a few minutes for us?
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm right now, I'm, like I said, I've been contacted by a couple dozen families. They say I can't practice law in Calgary or in Canada. One of the things we're looking at is the relationship between the U.S. version of Fueling Brains and the Canadian version of Fueling Brains, as to whether or not Canadian citizens might be able to avail themselves of the court system in the U.S. And so that's one of the things I'm looking at. The other thing
is Fueling Brains have operations in the U.S.?
Yes, yeah, and actually they're.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're based in Texas. So
really,
yeah, so yeah,
wow.
they actually it appears that it's unclear at this point. It's unclear if they started in Canada and moved to Texas, or started in Texas and also have offices in Canada or have operations in Canada. So that's something we're looking at.
Well, that's I guess that's yeah, I didn't know that. Well, we really appreciate your time, Bill.
My pleasure.
There's so many things to learn and know. I hope for your sake and the sake of the parents of the kids and those kids that are involved, that it all works out well, and that it concludes quickly. And for and even for public health, I feel sorry for them in a sense, because they're scrambling to try and find out what's happened, and it's in most of these cases it's always really hard to get to where. So I hope that time is on their side, and that they can conclude quickly what happened. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us from the UK again, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jay,
enjoy the rest of your day.